If you have trouble finding story ideas and you're a little bit envious of those people who have no trouble at all, what I'm talking about today is for you. Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. If it is your first time here, How to Write Good is a writing podcast that seeks to find principles and advice that can be applied across a broad range of writing situations. If you've been here before, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button below, and share. Ever since I got interested in writing, I've run into authors, especially big authors, who give out writing advice. And many of them have a lot of good things to say. It makes sense seeing that they do that for a living. They should be good at what they do. But there's one question that I really haven't seen answered in the way that I think is satisfying or useful to the person who is asking the question. The question is, where do your ideas come from? The answer is often something obtuse. It struck them like lightning. They woke up from a dream, or they looked at one thing, they were thinking about another, and they came up with their book idea. I don't think that actually answers the question. I think what the questioner is actually asking is, what are the mechanisms behind how the author thinks that allow them to come up with story ideas? To be honest, I'm not one of those people who struggles with coming up with ideas. I'm one of those people who are struck by an idea out of the blue. And for a long time, I didn't know why I thought this way either, but after some careful thought over the past few years, I think I know the general mechanisms behind why a person is suddenly struck with inspiration. And I believe even if you aren't a person who does not think in that way, you can practice thinking in that way until it becomes a habit and you're struck with inspiration as well. The differences between those struck with inspiration and those who have to struggle uphill to find an idea are similar to the differences between a person who can draw and a person who cannot draw. For the person who cannot draw, when they look out at the world, they see abstract objects. If you ever look out the window, you might see a tree, you might see a car, you might see the pavement. And when you start to draw, if you don't know how to draw, you'll put the pen to paper and you'll try to represent those things just as they are in your mind. The person who is unskilled in drawing will likely try to draw each individual thing separately. The person who is able to draw does not look at the world with the intent to abstract them in his mind. He's actually looking at the world to see them as he sees them. This might not make any sense right off the bat, but if you think about it, when you look at something, you don't see the whole thing of it. You just see a shape. And that is what the person who can draw is trying to do. They are trying to see everything in shapes so they can take those shapes and put them on a piece of paper. To clarify, if you've ever seen someone from above, you don't see their entire body. If you were trying to draw them from above, you would draw them a different shape than they actually are because you're from a different perspective. This is the reason why one of the ways you can learn to draw is by looking at black and white pictures. The black and white pictures allow a person to better see the shapes that make up the face or whatever else you're drawing. This is actually the way I learned to draw. The generation of other creative ideas is similar. It requires looking at the world in a different way. By this time, you're probably asking, how do I look at the world in a different way? The first step of this process is certainly something you've heard before. Get an idea notebook. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a notebook. It just has to be somewhere you put your ideas. I think having a notebook or something to write things down in is a vital aspect of being able to do this because it makes it a habit of noting things that you see. This act of noting unique things or interesting things in the world is the first step to coming up with interesting ideas. The advice I give to help you be able to note things in the world and see things from a different perspective is actually slowing down, taking a break from everything else and becoming bored. For some, this is just a Saturday afternoon. For others, this is very difficult, but I think it is necessary. The world is full of endless details in an endless amount of forms, and if you don't slow down, you'll miss that one detail that will help you reach that unique idea to put in your book. The things that you see in the world and write down do not have to be fun. They don't have to be pleasant. They might be something that bugs you for weeks after. They might be something that makes you cry. They might be something painful. But noting these things are especially important because most of what writing is representing hardship, difficulty, and overcoming that difficulty. Did you just get your heart broken? Step back from that heartbreak and write it down as objectively as you can. Do the sheets blowing on the clothesline make you feel relaxed? Have you heard a weird song that gives you a different perspective on the world? Write it down, write it down, write it down. The purpose of this isn't even to necessarily collect information to use in books later. It's to train your brain how to see things differently. This process of slowing down and taking note of things is what I use myself. And if you can make this a habit, it can permeate all forms of your thinking. You can pull ideas from anything, and you'll be surprised what can actually be inspirational. Getting in the habit of seeing things and seeing how they affect you emotionally is the first step in this process. But it isn't the end of the process. The next step of the process is what I like to just term daydreaming, but it's probably best understood as thinking about that idea in the context of a story. For example, the fantasy series I'm writing started with an obsession I have about folklore. I started to wonder what a fantasy world would look like if everything that was magical was approached as folklore rather than something that is known by most people. Looking at these ideas in the context of a story eventually led me to read more folklore and then eventually decide to start world building. By daydreaming, by looking at that idea in the context of a story, you can see whether it can undergird a story all by itself, and you can also explore the possibilities of the idea. Will this process allow you to come up with good ideas right away? Not necessarily. Being creative is complex. It can take time to shift your mindset. That's why I didn't say that this would automatically allow you to think this way or suddenly have ideas jump into your head. What it's going to require is for you to practice doing this until this type of thinking becomes a habit. And then once this thinking becomes a habit, you can focus on something else and it will run in the background like a program on a computer. And of course, this is only the start of the writing process. Writing a book is a whole series or perhaps even a web of very complex steps. You won't get there in a day. You might not get there in a year. But if you keep on working toward that goal and you keep on practicing, you will get better. For those of you who already keep an idea journal, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how useful you found it so far down below. If you need any other writing advice, here are some other videos I think you'd find useful. If you enjoyed this, you're probably wondering how you can support me. Well, you can actually do two simple things. Follow the first link below to grab a copy of my book, and then follow the second link and sign up for my newsletter. It's that simple. Those two things will mean the world to me and give me more time to write books and create content for you. As always, my name is Daniel Poppy, and this is How to Write Good.